I made a pretty sizable investment with Cami.
An investment you'll lose.
If you lose this...
Landman Season 3 is coming. The cameras are rolling in Fort Worth, and the question that every fan of Paramount's most-watched series has been sitting with since Tommy Norris closed out the Season 2 finale is the one that the first episode has to answer before anything else can begin. The man who spent 2 complete seasons protecting oil companies from cartel entanglements, who negotiated with Danny Morell not to gain an alliance but to neutralize a threat, has now written Gallino a 70-30 partnership agreement and handed him an operational stake in CTT oil exploration and cattle. Episode 1 of Season 3 is the first time the audience sees what that deal actually looks like in practice, and the question underneath every other question the season is going to raise is whether Tommy Norris understands what he has done or is choosing not to think about it yet. Will CTT's first major operation reveal that Gallino's financing comes with conditions that Tommy did not fully negotiate? Has Cami Miller's $400 million offshore drilling gamble already started showing the cracks that Tommy warned her about before she fired him? And does Season 3, Episode 1 open with M-Tex already in trouble? Is Cooper Norris's near-murder situation truly resolved? Or does the fact that the man he beat 17 times died of a heart attack on his way to the ER leave a legal thread that Season 3 pulls on from its very first scene? What does Rebecca Falcone do in a company whose president just walked out the door and whose new CEO has committed to a bet that her predecessor specifically refused to make? And is Tommy's closing line, "The time is coming when tragedy is going to dominate our days, but not today," the most important piece of foreshadowing in the show's history? And does Episode 1 mark the first day of that tragedy arriving? Every one of those questions has an answer, and this breakdown covers all of them. The single most important thing to understand about Landman Season 3, Episode 1, before a single frame has been publicly released, is what the Season 2 finale actually did. Because the finale did something that no Taylor Sheridan show has done in quite this way before. It ended happily. Not ambiguously, not bittersweet, not with the camera pulling back on a character standing on the edge of something uncertain. Tommy Norris closed out Tragedy and Flies by launching a new company, winning on every front simultaneously, and delivering a line that is equal parts celebration and warning. He turned down Chevron, he secured Gallino, he named the company after his family, CTT, for Cooper, Tommy, and TL. And he said today, they win, with the explicit acknowledgement that tragedy is coming. That acknowledgement is not incidental. It is the structural promise that Season 3 has to keep. A show as self-aware as Landman does not let its protagonist explicitly forecast incoming devastation and then fail to deliver it. The evidence from how Taylor Sheridan handles his most important closing lines across all of his shows, never as empty rhetoric, always as commitments that the next season has to honor, tells the audience that Tommy's forecast is not modesty or performative humility. It is the most honest thing Tommy Norris has said in 2 seasons, and it lands with the weight of a man who has been in the oil business long enough to know that the moment everything looks like it is going right is the moment the ground starts shifting beneath the equipment. Episode 1 is almost certainly going to open with the winds still fresh, CTT operational, the Gallino partnership active, Cooper legally clear, and use that temporary warmth to make whatever arrives next feel as costly as possible. However, unfortunately, the evidence from what the Gallino partnership actually represents makes the tragedy Tommy forecasted feel less like foreshadowing and more like a timeline. He is not just in business with a complicated figure. He is in business with a man the show spent 2 seasons depicting as the human face of cartel financing in the Permian Basin, and the 70-30 split that Tommy negotiated means Gallino is not a silent investor. He is the majority stakeholder. Whatever CTT does in Season 3, Episode 1, it does with Gallino's money, which means it does on Gallino's terms whether Tommy has acknowledged that yet or not. The most likely explanation for what Season 3, Episode 1 establishes in its opening act is a CTT that looks, on the surface, exactly like the legitimate independent oil company Tommy spent 2 seasons dreaming about. The evidence from the Season 2 finale shows Tommy working the phones, pitching in private jets, operating at a speed and intensity that suggests he already had a plan before Cami fired him, as if the firing itself was the starting gun, rather than the catastrophe. CTT Oil Exploration and Cattle has a name, a founding trio, and now a financing structure. What it does not yet have in Episode 1 is a track record, which means every deal Tommy makes in the season's opening hour is a deal made on the strength of his personal reputation rather than the company's institutional history. The evidence from how the show has always used Tommy's reputation as both his greatest asset and his greatest vulnerability tells the audience that Season 3, Episode 1 is going to establish exactly which people in the Permian Basin oil world will do business with CTT, and which ones will not touch it because of Gallino. What makes that distinction so significant for the episode's tone is that the people who will not do business with Tommy because of Gallino are probably the same people Tommy most wants as partners, the established players, the legitimate operators, the companies that built their Permian Basin presence on legal ground and careful due diligence. Those doors are potentially closed now. The evidence from 2 seasons of watching Tommy navigate the oil world's social architecture tells the audience he already knows which doors will open and which will not, and that the deals CTT can get in Season 3 are not the ones Tommy would have gone after when he was running M-Tex. They are the deals that only become available to a company backed by cartel financing, and taking those deals is how Tommy Norris stops being the most careful man in West Texas oil and becomes something he has never been before. The theory that changes the entire shape of Season 3, Episode 1 is the one about Cami Miller, and the evidence from the Season 2 finale's final positioning of her character makes it one of the most structurally significant threads the show has ever left unresolved. Cami fired Tommy because she believed his caution was incompatible with M-Tex's need to bet on offshore drilling. She told him directly, the president of her company cannot be averse to the very thing that built it. She committed $400 million to an offshore operation with roughly a 10% success rate by industry standards, which Tommy knew, which is why he warned her, which is why she fired him. The evidence from how Landman has always structured its corporate storylines, not as background texture, but as the primary engine of every major character decision, tells the audience that the offshore gamble is not going to quietly succeed in Season 3, without the show making any dramatic noise about it. Either it fails, which validates Tommy's caution and creates the M-Tex crisis that pulls every character back into a familiar orbit, or it succeeds, which is arguably more dangerous for the season's long-term story, because a successful Cami becomes a character with proof that she was right all along. However, unfortunately, the evidence from the show's own pattern across 2 seasons, Season 1's cartel war, Season 2's offshore gamble, suggests that the offshore platform that Cami bet the company on is going to become Season 3's central catastrophe. The fan theory posted on Reddit before the finale aired, that something catastrophic would happen on the offshore rig, was not dismissed by the show's writers' room when they structured the finale. It was validated by the fact that Cami's $400 million bet was positioned as the single largest financial risk any character has taken in the show's history, with the man who knew the odds best refusing to be present when the bet was called. A 10% success rate is not just a number, it is the show telling the audience that Cami is holding a ticket with a 90% chance of turning M-Tex into a disaster, and Season 3, Episode 1 is the episode where the audience finds out whether that ticket has already been drawn or is still pending. The most logical conclusion from the evidence is that the offshore platform's fate becomes the season's central ticking clock, and that every deal Tommy makes with CTT is being made in the shadow of a disaster that, when it arrives, will reshape every relationship in the show's universe. But the theory that cuts closest to the emotional center of Season 3, Episode 1 is the one about Cooper, and the evidence from how the finale handled his situation tells the audience that the resolution was deliberately incomplete. Cooper Norris beat the man who sexually assaulted his fiancée Ariana 17 times. The man died of a heart attack on his way to the emergency room. Tommy spent the Season 2 finale working the legal angles while simultaneously building CTT, hitching private jet rides, working power lunches, keeping Cooper out of a murder charge while also launching a company. The resolution arrived. Cooper was not charged. Tommy celebrated. However, unfortunately, the death of a man from a cardiac event that followed immediately after a 17-strike beating is not the kind of thing that disappears cleanly, simply because no charges were filed. Medical examiners write reports. Civil attorneys read those reports. Families of deceased men retain lawyers who are not bound by the same prosecutorial standards that kept Cooper out of criminal court. The most logical conclusion from the evidence is that Season 3, Episode 1 opens with Cooper technically free but not legally safe, and that the civil exposure from the man's death is the show's way of keeping the pressure on the family while the professional story of CTT is getting established. Cooper's arc in Season 3 is almost certainly not a story about a young man who made a violent choice and moved on. It is a story about what that choice costs when the bills that criminal court dismissed start arriving in civil court's envelope. While the Tommy Gallino partnership and the CTT launch dominate the Season 3 setup, there is another storyline building in the background that every fan needs to take seriously before Episode 1 arrives, and it belongs to Rebecca Falcone. Kayla Wallace's Rebecca entered Season 2 as M-Tex's COO, the most technically capable operational figure in the company's structure, and ended the season in a position that the show has left almost entirely unaddressed. Tommy is gone. Cami is in place, but now has committed the company to an offshore operation that its most experienced president explicitly refused to endorse. Rebecca is the person who actually knows how to run M-Tex's day-to-day operations, and she is now doing so inside a company whose new strategic direction was set without her input, and whose best institutional knowledge just left to start a competitor. The evidence from how Season 2 used Rebecca as the competent professional who consistently understood situations correctly and had no political power to act on that understanding tells the audience that Season 3 is going to give Rebecca the crisis that finally forces her to either act on what she knows or be destroyed by the machine she has been loyal to. However, unfortunately, her specific position in Season 3, Episode 1 is the most complicated it has been in 2 seasons. She has to run a company whose founding president was fired, whose new CEO has made a bet she probably shares Tommy's concerns about, and whose operational future is now tied to whether an offshore drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico performs at 10 times its industry average. The evidence strongly suggests that Episode 1 is the episode where Rebecca Falcone's loyalty to M-Tex stops being a professional habit and starts being a genuine choice. The secondary character whose Season 3 arc every fan should be watching from Episode 1's very first scene is TL, and the evidence from the season finale's establishment of the CTT founding trio tells the audience that TL's role in Season 3 is going to be significantly more central than anything he was given in the first 2 seasons. He is not just a hands-on roughneck anymore. He is a founding partner, one of the 3 letters in the company's name, and that elevation carries a weight that the show has not yet had occasion to explore. TL has always been the human connective tissue between Tommy's corporate maneuvering and the actual physical reality of oil work. He knows the rigs, the crews, the rhythms of field operations in ways that a landman and a lawyer never fully can. He has also spent 2 seasons watching the corporate world do things that the field world would never do. Make bets without understanding the physics, sign deals without visiting the equipment, commit to timelines that no one who has spent time on a rig would agree to. In a company whose founding is partially financed by Gallino, TL's read on what the work actually looks like in practice is going to matter more than any deal Tommy can close in a private jet. The evidence from how Landman has always used the field-level perspective to ground its corporate storylines tells the audience that TL's Season 3 arc is the show's way of keeping the physical reality of the oil business in the frame, even as the story around CTT becomes increasingly about power, money, and moral compromise. The evidence strongly suggests that Episode 1 will establish TL's specific operational role within CTT, not as a subordinate, but as a genuine partner with a stake in whether the company's values match what it was named for. After everything Season 2 set up, and everything the confirmed Season 3 production details have revealed, the question every fan is holding is the simplest. When does Episode 1 actually arrive? The evidence from the production timeline is the most reliable guide available. Cast member James Jordan confirmed in late July 2026 that filming begins in September 2026 and runs through Q1 2027. Paramount Plus renewed Landman for Season 3 in December 2025 after confirming it as the streamer's most-watched series in history, with Season 2's premiere drawing nearly 3 times the viewership of Season 1's debut. Season 1 premiered November 17, 2024. Season 2 premiered November 16, 2025. The annual November pattern suggests a strong institutional preference for a holiday season launch that both previous seasons validated with record viewership growth. Season 2's premiere drew almost 3 times the viewership of Season 1's debut, making Landman Paramount's most-watched original series in the streamer's history, a position that Paramount Plus confirmed in its Q1 2026 quarterly filing. The stakes for Season 3 could not be higher for the platform, and the evidence from how Paramount Plus has handled its most valuable properties suggests that no premiere date will be announced until the show is close enough to finished that the marketing team can begin building toward it. However, unfortunately, the September filming start makes a November 2026 premiere essentially impossible and significantly compresses the post-production window, even for a mid-2027 target. Billy Bob Thornton told Howie Mandel's podcast that shooting would begin at the end of August, and TV Guide noted that on Season 2, August was when they finished shooting. The September to Q1 2027 production window also coincides with Taylor Sheridan's most crowded development slate to date. The creator who wrote Landman's scripts is simultaneously overseeing Lioness, Tulsa King, and multiple other Paramount Plus productions. The most realistic premiere window, accounting for the September start, the Q1 2027 wrap, and a standard post-production cycle, is mid to late 2027, with the specific date contingent on Paramount Plus announcing the trailer. Based on everything the production timeline confirms and everything the Season 2 finale set in motion, the Season 3 Episode 1 trailer, when it arrives, will be the most anticipated footage the show has ever released, and based on what Tommy's closing line promised, what it shows is going to be worth the wait. Now the conversation moves to the fans. 3 questions need answering before Season 3 Episode 1 arrives. Is the Gallino partnership the thing that eventually destroys CTT? The deal that Tommy made because it was the only financing available becomes the deal that compromises every operation CTT runs. And does Season 3 Episode 1 plant the first seed of that compromise in a way the audience can see but Tommy cannot? Does Cami Miller's $400 million offshore drilling gamble fail catastrophically in Season 3 in a way that brings her back into Tommy's orbit out of desperation rather than choice? Or does it succeed and produce the first version of Cami Miller that Tommy has never had to negotiate with, one who has been proven definitively right? And the question that Tommy's closing line made the entire season hinge on, when tragedy finally dominates the days that Tommy forecasted in the finale, does it arrive from the outside in the form of Gallino's true agenda becoming clear, or from the inside in the form of Cooper's civil exposure becoming a crisis that the new company cannot absorb without fracturing the family that CTT was built to protect? The video on screen covers everything else fans need to know before Season 3 Episode 1 finally drops.